Victor Perton here for the Centre for Optimism, and welcome to our Optimism Cafe. Ferocious Warmth, Infectious Optimism. Tracey Ezard in conversation. I've always admired Tracey's work. Her book Glue was fantastic, and in fact incorporated useful materials from our Australian Leadership Project. Tracey has continued to develop, and her unique Ferocious Warmth leadership that connects the head and the heart, results in relationships, courage and compassion. It's wonderful work. But always in these optimism cafes, our first question is, what makes you optimistic?
Thanks, Victor. Well, seeing your beautiful orange coat and your smiling face makes me optimistic. Seeing the faces on everyone that's come in the door always makes me optimistic. People make me optimistic, and it's people and possibility. So I love the question that you ask of people, and I was reflecting on it this morning, and possibility and opportunity always come up for me, and it comes through the lens of how do we really harness our own strengths and those of the people around us to do the work that we need to do, whatever it might be, but also have joy in it. So possibility and opportunity.
And so tell us, man, when we first met, you had just published Glue,
Mm.
which was a fantastic book. And I think I published 2 interviews on it and videos. And I said, at that point, my 2 guru books were John Hagel's The Power of Pull and Tracey Ezard's Glue.
Wow.
But what has drawn you to Ferocious Warmth and Ferociously Warm Leadership?
It's been a journey of a long time of being a leader, and then working for the last 15 years with leaders all around Australia, especially, and New Zealand, and just being able to see the leaders who were able to be extraordinary about 2 things. One was extraordinary about transforming. So often it was around transforming education, transforming health, transforming opportunities for more vulnerable people. But at the same time, they were extraordinary about relationships as well. And I think this is a really unusual combination that actually is great leadership. And it's sort of the essence of fantastic leadership when we see people who they're encouraging people to lift and evolve and deal with the complexity in a way that people just want to come with them. And it's not an easy road, it's a journey, but I started to get this idea that really, we often think in dichotomy. We often think of either or rather than and, which is why, and I can see my camera can't find it, the symbol of ferocious warmth is the infinity, where we draw from the head and the heart all the time, and we do that dance in the middle of what's the logic, what's the strategy, where is it we need to go to, what's the action we need, but at the same time, what's the deep empathy and connection that we have with the people we're leading and with ourselves as well. So I just have always been fascinated and drawn to leaders that just innately do it. And the big thing they always do, which is, sort of the evolution of the work I've done, is build very strong collaborations with the people they work with. So it's not the authoritarian leader, it's the leader that works with the distributed leadership model, but at the same time being able to create this environment of great transformation. So, and that's where Glue and my first book, The Buzz, really came from, that environment of deep collaboration, deep trust. And the Australian Leadership Program, I sort of took quite a lot of quotes out of the interviews you'd already done, Victor, and put them into the book because it was a great diverse example of where leaders saw trust. And I think people see trust when it's both. They see trust where you have a deep belief in them and you see them and value them. But at the same time, you're also going somewhere. It's not about sitting with the status quo. So that's where the ferocious warmth came from. I've been interviewing lots of leaders. One of them is on the call today, Vicky Bayliss, who I introduced before. So nice to see you, Vicky. And Vicky is the former chief executive of the Department of Education in the Northern Territory. And they have been, on the last few years, on a huge journey of transformation. And it was just amazing to see the work that they did. And so I had the honour of interviewing Vicky for the book, and just being able to try to tap into what goes on in the minds and the hearts, the heads and the hearts and the guts of Ferocious Warmth Leadership. So I don't know, is that enough to kick off us?
It's marvelous, and you know, I'd actually forgotten you published some of that material, and now of course I call that to mind. So, I mean, you call it ferociously warm leadership. We call it realistic and infectiously optimistic, and you know, they're concepts that are so close, and of course, and we've got Caroline in the call with optimism of the heart. So how do you draw those themes together? What do you see as that emerging strong leader? In fact, I'll throw in one more quote, because Dominic Barton, who was the head of McKinsey, said to me, look, you can talk about 50, 70, 80 qualities of the leader, but it comes back to exactly what you say. It's the leader who can be infectious. So, you know, whether it's the cleaner that's leading or, you know, the shop floor, but it's not the rah-rah leader at the front. So maybe perhaps it's a long question, but so the real question is ferociously warm leaders, infectiously optimistic leaders. Are they the same people?
Yes, absolutely. Infectious and realist optimists. And I've been right in the middle of this at the moment, because I'm writing the chapter around the paradox of yet and the duality of yet. So the great leaders we know are at the same time optimists and realists. And so I've been in the middle of this, you know, these two different strengths. You know, how do we be directive yet open to influence? How do we create an environment where we are inspiring people to lift, but we actually do it in a way that they come with us as well? So I love the neuroscience of leadership. And one of the things we know is that our emotions are contagious. And, you know, I love working with people, with teams and with leaders to create that I call them joy bubbles. So we, you know, what are the joy bubbles that we have around our work? What helps us get in flow? What is it that makes us get to the end of a really hard day maybe and go, wow, but we did this in this way that helped us see there was light, you know, and joy. And I think that's the optimism. But at the same time, the realist has that pragmatic approach to say, what do we need to do now? You know, what is it that's going to help us adapt to these circumstances, or be strategic about what we need to do right now? Jim Collins talks about it in Good to Great. You know, he talks about the Stockdale paradox of, you know, General Stockdale being in the Hanoi Hilton, you know, and being there for 8 years. And he said, you know, well, who were the ones that didn't make it through? Because he was tortured and came out the other side. And he said it was the eternal optimists that actually just said, we'll be out by Easter, we'll be out by Christmas, but weren't actually able to say, well, what do we need to do to survive getting through? And, you know, in Melbourne, that's exactly where we're at. We know we've got tough times that we're in the middle of and continuing on. But what is it that we need to do to keep that light in? I think that's realist optimism. That's ferocious warmth leadership.
Brilliant. Well, if I can throw to Caroline, our optimist heart, and then throw to Rob, and then throw it open to everyone. So, Caroline, what's your response, and how would you craft a question to Tracey?
I love what you're talking about, Tracey, and I sort of said something in our program yesterday. I hear your words, but it's very clear. It's got depth of years of visceral living experience underneath them. So, you know, just to note that it's not just the theory that you're spouting. So that's very clear. I have a question, because I think you're 100% right about these bubbles and the contagion that's caused by emotion. And it's a vibration, isn't it? You know, so you can't fake it. You can't, especially if you're in a team that's very close and work together. So if you're a leader and you're struggling emotionally, and you know you're the one who has to kind of hold that vision and be real, but you're not able to be the contagion, how would you recommend someone deal with that?
Thanks. Great question, Caroline. I was speaking one-on-one with a leader last week about this, who is usually an incredibly optimistic, joyful person, and he was really struggling. And So first off, he knew he had to do more stuff for himself. So this was, I put a video out on LinkedIn this morning around, what are you doing for yourself? Because if we're giving out all the time, we've got to be giving in as well. So he knew he needed to do that. He needed to spend time away from the lens. But what he did for the day, he said, I just spent some time on Zoom with the people that I lead and just... I wasn't too sure whether I should do it or not, but I got on with them and I said, hey, great to connect with you. And can we spend a bit of time having a chat? I'm struggling this week. I'm sort of, it's been hard for me this week. How are you going? And he said that the opening up of just that vulnerability to say, I'm not traveling so well just at the moment. He said by the end of the day, he was feeling great. At the end of each conversation, he was feeling great because the interaction, the connection, the heart-to-heart conversation, he naturally went into his optimism again. He naturally sees the strengths of others, but he was able to authentically go, yeah, it's pretty tough. And do you know what? The people on the other end saw him as authentically him. And that's a key piece of Ferocious Warmth, is what's the leadership being that you are. And I find talking with leaders, it's usually an authenticity and it's a humbleness, it's a humility that they bring to the space. So
yeah. And Tracey, at the beginning, when we were still in the green room, you mentioned Brene Brown, and a huge part of her work is around vulnerability, and that's what brings the connection, which builds the trust, which enables real collaboration take place. And one of it, you said this guy, it's a guy, and one of the things she says in her research, that it shows up for men that to be vulnerable, to say I don't know or I'm not feeling, it equals weakness in our culture.
Yes.
So that is a big thing for this guy to just go and say, hey, I'm not traveling so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and it is. I do find that most of my great models around Ferocious Warmth that came very easily to me were female. So they had that real warmth, that ability to say, look, yeah, this is really tough, and be okay with that. So it's been joyful because I have interviewed some great men who are also able to, and it's a very big definer that they do, is they're willing to go, geez, I stuffed up. I really made a mistake there. And same with women. There's certainly women that can't do that and put up that invulnerability too. But, absolutely I've got, that brilliant quote from Jacinda Ardern of, that I totally rebel against the thought that you cannot make good, hard, courageous decisions with kindness and compassion. And that we need more kindness and compassion in our leaders, from our leaders. People want to be seen. People are struggling with not being seen, and yet the difference you can make by just doing that is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah. I have one final question. I was looking at your website and reading some of your material, and one of the things that for me connects in with this is what you talk about, the capacity to also sit with not knowing. And I think that whole imposter syndrome and, feeling like you must know if you're the leader, how can anyone possibly know the whole scope at this time? So what do you say to people who are kind of struggling with that?
With not knowing. I think it's a practice thing, so as well as being one of the core elements of Ferocious Warmth, expansion is the other one. So it's about being the lead learner. It's a term that we use in education a lot, because a lot of my work is in education. But, truly being the lead learner, to say I'm always expanding. So there is going to be things that I don't know. And B, it's how arrogant is it that we even think that we don't know, So there's a researcher, Dr. Victor Atati, and he talks about closed dogmatism effect, that when we see ourselves as very strong leaders, we close down, we speak with judgment, we close down our ideas of opening up to greater ideas from others. Whereas the great leader, I think, comes to this stuff with that novice approach of, I've got my opinions, I've got my vast experience, but I'm seeking to always expand it. I actually call it challenging ourselves with our ignorant truth. That we all come to the table around with an ignorant truth, that I have a model of the world of how I see the world, but everyone in this room has their own model of the world. And when we come together and we deeply listen to each other without judgment, but with curiosity and learning, we seek to expand that model of the world. But we've got to be willing to go, I don't know, and I don't know it all, and I don't know your position, I don't know your perspective. That's when we get to some great learnings and openings up just in society in general. Yeah.
Yeah. I could be very greedy here and keep going, Tracey, because I love your answering and the exploration, but I know I'm going to pass over to Rob now. Go for it, Rob.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Tracey.
Tracey, one of the things that's always fascinated me, and as Victor said, I've worked with a number of prime ministers over the past few decades, but is leadership now under greater scrutiny than it ever was? And is the leadership issue a personal call by leaders, or is the societal call for leaders? What's behind the need for a much more engaging leadership than it ever has been in my experience?
It's a great one. I'd be really interested in Vicky's perspective on this too, as a former system leader. And it's a duality there, isn't it? It's absolutely. One of the things that drives Ferocious Warmth Leaders is a very strong moral purpose, a very strong connection to what is the difference that I'm here to make. And it may be a small, tiny difference. You know, I work with human services where I might work with a team leader who's just made a huge difference for a homeless person on the street. And then the next day I might be working with an executive whose organisation is making a huge difference to that person on the street. But they both those people in both ways are making huge impact. So I think society is calling us to get out of our knowing of how to do things, ask more questions of the people who need our services, ask more people about what's really going on for them, rather than making, you know, these assumptions that we often do. So yeah, I think it's a call up to the whole of society, especially around mental health issues. You know, you look at the dire stuff that comes out around how many people hate coming to work, you know, hate working in their environment because the culture is toxic. And I think that's just so depressing. And yet I've seen great cultures turn around where there's been a new leader come in, and all of a sudden people have felt that optimism. They've felt that change. They've felt that impact because that leader has come in, seen that their job is to serve those people, not the other way around. If we take some, you know, Simon Sinek sort of lens on things. But yeah, I think it's a really big shift for all leaders in Australia to have to look at how are we leading from the head and the heart, because there's too much head stuff goes on.
With that, there has been a theory around for a fair amount of time now about the first 100 days of leadership. As you just mentioned, new people come in and they change the dynamics of an organisation. Yeah. But we make this judgment, or leaders put that expectation on their own role of what I can do in the first 100 days. Do you hold with that theory?
I think you can make a huge difference. Yes, I do, because I think that we can change, if we go to the neuroscience of this, we can change people's neural pathways from foe to friend simply by the way we smile at people, simply by the way we sit down and we listen deeply. So, you know, leaders that I've seen and worked with, that when they go into a new place, what they do is they sit down and they deeply listen to people, change the chemistry and culture comes from the dance. I love Judith E. Glaser's work on conversational intelligence. I've used her work for many years, and it's changed culture in many huge organisations. And unfortunately, Judith passed away a couple of years ago, but her legacy is the methodology of going into deep listening to be able to seek to understand and listen to connect. And I think leaders who do that and ask really great questions make a huge impact on people when people see that they are with them, not against them. So your impact can be huge and quicker, you know, than 100 days, I reckon. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read the chat box.
I'll hand it over to you.
I wonder if I can throw to Vicky Bayless to respond.
Thanks, Victor, and thank you, Tracey. If I go back to Robert's question, and Robert, if you were asking about the first 100 days of when you take on a role and you've got a positional authority, you're not a leader because of the title, is the subtitle of my lived experience, I think. You're given that gift because somebody has a judgment that they've made about you. But what you do next is what will make the difference for the long term. And it goes back to Tracey's deep listening. Being present, being out, and when you're in the Northern Territory, it's being out and about, whether that's on the road or whether that's via these sorts of means and modes or whatever it is. It's about taking the time, making the time in what everybody will tell you is an incredibly busy role, but nothing is more important than the people that you work with. Whether that's your minister, whether that's your chief minister, who really do think they're the most important people. But for me, it was from the kids in the classroom, through to the teachers and to the school leaders. And if we couldn't see the connect from the classroom to the boardroom, then we were missing the whole opportunity. And it was around what was being said. It was the children who wrote the strategy for the Northern Territory. It was their voice and their agency. But it was through amazing educators and through incredibly talented leaders, both within our corporate sector and in our schools, that facilitated that agency. And, you know, the question before was, what do you do when you're feeling absolutely exhausted? You actually don't have to do this on your own. And it's how you grow and build others to come with you, and how you actually step aside and be a partner with, that gives you the energy, so that when you step forward, it's your turn. You know, the geese flying analogy is the one that works for me all the time. You can't be out there on your own all the time. You just end up tired. So what do? It's the team that's with you in whatever shape or form. So, you know, and I also appreciate Carolyn's words, and that the stuff that you were saying, Victor, about optimism. My optimism as a person comes through other people's commitment, challenge, desire to think differently, build better, try something new, argue the point, and get in there and just have a go. So they're the things that make me optimistic. So I'm grateful for having had the opportunities I did, but I'm also grateful for Tracey to find the words that I didn't know that this was what we were doing.
Just brilliant. Well, we're going to have to get some stories from you either today or another time on leadership in the Northern Territory.
Oh, yeah.
Most challenging educational environment in Australia. April has joined us from Denver, Tracey.
Hi, April.
April wanted to ask a question about engaging leadership.
Victor, I'm sorry. Good, I guess good morning to all of you. I was just curious about, in terms of engaging, in terms of leadership, that's a huge problem we have in the States, and kind of what your thoughts are about that issue, in terms of how that can be done. And I believe that some of that has just been answered by Vicki Bayliss, in terms of some of those characteristics, but if anybody wants to add to that, I'd be curious.
If I can just put in something before it goes out, you know, you know, the work that Vicki alluded to up in the Northern Territory of getting principals involved, getting students involved, getting teachers involved in the big strategic momentum that went forward was incredibly inspiring. And I worked with one day with a whole bunch of students, learners, learning ambassadors that they have, and they had done a whole year of work looking at what needed to shift and change. And then they all walked over to Parliament House and they presented to Vicki and the Minister for Education, and you know, that opportunity to access leadership is what we need. How do you make yourself accessible? Are you approachable? You know, this is the Ferocious Warmth leader is absolutely approachable. And I will often say to leaders, let's not talk about an open door policy. if the litmus test says that no one walks through your door, because I would suggest that the open door policy probably is little bit beyond, you know, them walking in and actually you getting out. So, you know, getting out, and Vicky mentioned this as well, getting out, talking, but more than talking, asking really good questions that elicit both who the human is you're talking to, but what matters to them as well.
You know, my son commented that he felt here in America that the voices of our youth are not being listened to because they don't vote.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I mean, your government is a little bit different in how it works. But when you talk about learning ambassadors, I'm assuming that's youth. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
are you talking?
Yes,
So,
yep.
so it sounds like in your culture, you're starting to create, you know, a real voice for those people, which is really cool. And I know Victor has been working on that with his summit that's coming up, the Nelson Mandela Leadership Summit. What would you suggest to people in America about that, about youth voice and how to do that? One thing you've mentioned is open door. What else?
So Vicky, you're probably best equipped because you worked both in urban and some of the most isolated communities on earth. So do you want to address how you got that voice of youth?
It's a grassroots thing. It has to start with really committed people who are wanting to learn. And that starts with your educators and your school leaders. But importantly, they know that their audience and their primary group are the people that they're working with. And whether it's in education or whether it's in health or whether it's through other services where we've been able to connect young people into a legitimate and known and trusted process where they are scaffolded and supported to be able to grow their capability to have genuine, more than voice, and it's more than agency. That's where you start in giving them a voice, but you build it into agency to influence, but then you actually get them into collaboration and co-creation, and they are partners in whatever the work is that you're on about. That's where you get the real momentum. It's not a top-down thing. But as a leader, you need to be open to sponsoring this. You need to create the space and the enablers to let that happen. But you need that goodwill of intelligent, decent people. They don't have to be teachers, but they just need to be intelligent, decent people who value a future and see that young people are part of that. And that most of the time they're the recipients of the decision of wise, supposed adults. And that they actually know more about the service that they want, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's a mental health service or whether it's access to a sporting service. They absolutely have a deep understanding about how their world could be better and how they could contribute to that in a process that starts at the grassroots. And then you create the broader opportunities to influence politically, but that's not where you start.
Vicky, you've got global curiosity. If I can jump around, Bill Gormley wants to ask you a question about Northern Territory education. Then we'll call in Noirin, and then it's open mic, but just the easiest way to run an open mic is you'll see at the bottom of your screen there's chat. Just pop your name in there if you want to go next in making a comment or asking a question. So Bill Gormley, do you want to ask your question of Vicky?
Yes, thank you, Victor. Vicky, I'm following up on the previous question and asking to go another layer deeper on the process. And my questions are two. What are the key issues of the day that you teased out through your process of discovery in the education system in the Northern Territories and in Australia in general, for that matter? And how did the students and teachers raise these issues constructively so that they're actionable?
So we had a very traditional structure in our corporate setting that wrote strategy and policy. And we know how to do that because we've been doing it for a long time and we were getting the results that we were getting. And I had a courageous group of 3 principals decide that they were going to line me up as the CE to tell me that they didn't want 254 strategies in a strategic plan that they were expected to implement. And I said, well, don't tell me, tell my executive board. And then if you're going to come and talk to us, then you better come to us with some ideas about how we might go about doing that. So they did some international research and national research, and they fronted up, and they didn't miss any one of us that were sitting in that executive board meeting about what they thought we could do to improve the overall education system. And the Territory has a lot of work to do. We deal with some of the most vulnerable, isolated children, and we deal with some of the most incredibly talented, gifted children. And so you're dealing with a full spectrum, and they've dispersed in a very big piece of geography. So when I went to my strategic policy area and said, well, right, we've been challenged, how are we going to do it? Well, they had meetings and more meetings. Mm-hmm. And I went, no, I'm not doing meetings. Meetings have got us to where we are. We have to try something else. So we asked for volunteers who would help us create this, who were not normally part of the strategic policy unit. They were the unit that had to facilitate this. And the Deputy Chief Executive and I had a team of 5 school leaders, 5 corporate leaders, and 5 people who were out of our executive corporate team who provided support. And we did something like, I have no idea how many plane visits, how many boats, how many road trips, but we hit thousands of people in every part of the Northern Territory. And we had 3 questions. What's working now? What would make it better? And if we were going to stop, what should we stop? It's not rocket science. They're just good common sense questions. And when you ask your parents, and when you ask your kids, and when you ask your school leaders, and you ask your educators, and you ask whoever turns up, and your key stakeholder groups, they all have a voice and they all have a view. And the gift of all of that information was the themes started to emerge. And a lot of it was, we need to stop writing strategies about measures. So attendance is a measure, but we'd have a whole, it's not a strategy in itself. We need to get kids to learn, and getting them to school is a big part of that. But when you start to go, we're just going to measure kids learning through an attendance measure, that's not sufficient. So the kids were really clear. I come to school when somebody knows and cares about me. And I come to school when my learning is something that I can take home and my family is proud of me. So there's your gold. That's your gift. You couldn't ask, and that's where the strategy goes. So it's about engagement, it's about growth, and it's about achievement. It's pretty simple.
Oh my God, my heart sings, Vicky.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in there, Victor? Because I've written that actual story. I've written into Ferocious Warmth in the book, and it was so good to talk with Vicky about it. And the part in the book that I've put it into is, the third piece for Ferocious Warmth Leaders, which is about conviction, and that to transform, which is really what they've been doing in Northern Territory, kicked off by the amazing work of Vicky and everyone in that, was a conviction of a couple of key beliefs sitting there, a conviction that we needed to do this work in the first place, but also a conviction of doing it with people, not to people. And I think this is just something that we can really look at in our leaders, is what are the base beliefs that sit below the conviction that comes out, and do they help us as a society to move forward? And I think you can hear it in bucket loads from what Vicky says.
And Tracey, if I might, I think this links back to the point you and Caroline were making earlier about emotion as a carrier for that conviction. Yes. And when the teachers transmit to the children that they value them and that they're glad they're attending and they're glad that they're putting effort into their work. I mean, I just feel a lot of wonderful emotion running through that, Vicky, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The principles that are, another beautiful education person, Claudine Moncur White, outside Townsville, you know, totally shifted attendance in her school, and a whole range of other things that lifted by absolutely ferocious warmth leadership of helping every family see that they were seen. And every morning she would be out at the school gate, welcoming kids in, just noticing whether they had shoes or not. And if not, just quietly going and making sure that they got some shoes, saying good day to the parents, making it friendly, making it we're compelled to go, not repelled. And I think it's the same as leaders in any organisation. Do we create an environment where people are compelled to come and be with us, or are they repelled? Yeah. Heart.
God, it's unusual for me to mute myself. Noirin, you had a question.
Hi. Yeah, really enjoying this discussion today. Thank you. It's very, very enriching. My question was, it's going to change tack a little bit, and it's to Tracey actually. So the most commonly used definition of optimism that I've heard is that optimism is a belief that somehow things will work out in the end, and if they don't work out in the end, it's not the end. But what if there's no light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, we've just been put into stage ongoing forever lockdown in Victoria, and you know, it's really it's a bad Monday for a lot of people. And the question I would have, Tracey, is how do you lead, even if you are an optimist? How do you lead when there really is no light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I suppose I fundamentally don't agree with the statement, I suppose, Noirin. I don't want to, I'm not meaning to say that in a way that I suppose I see there is light everywhere. There's light in the fact that the jasmine is blooming at the moment. There's light in the fact that, you know, my daughter, who can struggle to get to school, got to her classes online today. And if she had to get on the train to go to school, she might not have got there. There's light in the fact that I can talk to my great-grandmother via FaceTime on her iPad. And if this had happened 20 years ago, that never would have been possible. There's light in the fact that our numbers are going down. So I think we have to be light bringers. And I think when it's really hard for ourselves, when we're feeling, sorry to be politically incorrect, when we're feeling crappy and our itty bitty shitty committee in our head is going crazy, that we have to actually bring the light first to ourselves. So what is the little thing that I can do to actually make me feel better? And is it, so my girlfriends and I, when this first lockdown first happened, so, you know, full diaries. We run our own businesses, full diaries, going and working with people, speaking at conferences, whatever it might be. All of a sudden, diary, dead. March, absolutely dead. And so we would get on and have Zoom sessions together. What are we going to do? You know, and sometimes we'd just get together and just go, but we would do things like, one of my girlfriends sent an image that she got in the paper that you could get a Hermes lipstick, right? So I would never buy anything Hermes, like it just blows me away, but I could buy a lipstick. So we all bought ourselves a Hermes lipstick. We all waited till the 4 of us had it delivered, and we all got them out and we all put them on. And when we catch up for a drink or whatever, we get our lippies out and we put them on. And it's a little joy bubble that helps me get through sometimes those days. So I think if we can go, what light can we bring to ourselves first?
Yeah.
We fill up our well a bit to be able to give the light to others.
Yeah, no, thank you. I suppose, I mean, yeah, from a micro perspective, I mean, being present and being grateful for stuff, it helps enormously. I completely agree. I think they're great practices to do. I just think when you're leading a team of people and they're working, they're employees, and you don't have any answers for them. And yeah, they're interested in the moment. You can bring them back to the moment and you can be bright yourself. But really, when they don't know and you don't know if they're going to have a job in about 6 weeks' time, because there's a lot of businesses that are closing now. So I closed my business. I have 2 businesses. One was entertainment, and I closed that back in March, and I've gone online. But a lot of my compatriots in the whole space, I mean, like, it's very hard for them to be grateful for things in the moment. And it's very hard for even the leaders in that space to be grateful for things in the moment, when really the bigger issue is, I'm going to lose my house. I mean, I am. you know? So bring it down to the micro. I know what you mean, and I do that myself, but it just,
Yeah.
I mean, from a leadership perspective, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do
Yeah.
practically?
Well, I think it also, it brings us, you know, if we look at the whole P word, the whole pivot word, that, you know, I used to be involved in the hospitality industry and was a business manager in a fine dining restaurant. And when I look at the hospitality industry and what they did is they got together and went, how do we innovate around this and how do we do this differently? And you know, in Melbourne, people like Shane Delia, who created Providor, which has allowed all these great fine dining restaurants not to go down the tubes, but to actually sort of maintain. You know, a guy, Atlas Dining, who you get on your verandas, this beautiful fresh food that he then does a video, and it's beautiful restaurant food that you have fun making with your family. And my in-laws delivered it for us, and they cooked the same meal, we cooked the same meal, and we had a restaurant night via Zoom. So I think as leaders, we have got to look at that adaptability. What are we going to try? Let's give things a go, and helping people to be optimistic about, if we stay doing the same stuff, it is going to be pretty hard. But how can we, and you know, I think, Noirin, I think sometimes we don't actually name it. So I think a great leader is able to name, hey, this sucks. And
I agree.
Yeah, oh, this sucks. And sometimes just sitting in the space of that not knowing, but also just, you know, how are we going? You know, why don't we get a bar of chocolate, just sit and just talk about how crap things are for a moment? Because we know that we're then going to go, okay, what are we going to do next? So it's the question of what are we going to do next that I think as leaders, we have to be able to show that we're willing to go there, be innovative, try different stuff. Look at what's the landscape doing. Like you probably saw, you know, if we go back to restaurants, some of them did it straight away, and then others didn't. They took a few months, and then they started pivoting to that online pickup, delivery in a couple of suburbs, all that sort of stuff. And I know that's maybe more Melbourne based, but still, I reckon it's how can we see possibility, opportunity, and adaptability?
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm watching Tracey eating her lunch. Some nice man is serving her lunch, so she's doing well. Oh, sorry, that's the other Tracey with a C. There's another Tracey.
Yes, nice, beautiful.
The other day, Tracey, Rotary Perton, which represents all those, you know, little shops in Chapel Street and High Street, pulled together a meeting of the leadership of the streets. And Rachel, who's online here, joined in. So I just wondered, Rachel, can you tell Tracey what the you know, because Chapel Street is dead. They actually showed a video, Tracey, of this lively street, and they had a, you know, camera from the sky showing nothing moving. So Rachel, for a street where there's 2,000 traders and nothing moving, do you want to share with Tracey what you're up to?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I have an online business locally, but I live locally. So I know I've lived in this community for a long time. I know a lot of these shopkeepers, retail and hospitality and small businesses have been given a really big blow yesterday. I have been down this morning and spoken to several key people. They're working, they're pushing really, really hard all day today with local council, and they've gone federal as well to do something really quickly from a political aspect. What we're doing at the people level is working again just to give them hope and optimism. Relationship is our first focus. Because if we believe if we can build that relationship with our residents, our customers, just people that in the area, that for us, we want to do as much as we can for as many people in these circumstances. So I've learned so much from being on here. I've taken heaps of notes. You're amazing. And even though it doesn't seem like there's hope, there really is. There is so much. We just have to help people to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've highlighted, what I love about this is the people we've gone to have highlighted the 4 major elements of ferocious warmth and you've named the last one there, Rachel, which is connection. And, connection is that, how do we actually know that we can't do anything unless we have a love of belief of humankind, and that the connections we make are the things that are going to be really clear about getting us through. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. So if I just, those 4 then first one's expansion. So it's about the learner. It's about curiosity and learning and possibility. The second one is conviction. So having really strong courage and conviction about what you stand for and who you stand for. And then we have connection, which is all about love and being able to create that heart-to-heart connection with people. And then the last one is the element of being, which is bringing your authentic and self to your leadership and your humility to your leadership. So they're the 4 elements that I've just seen in so many of the ferocious warmth leaders that I've worked with over, decades now. Decades.
Tracey,
well, all
you
my
are
life.
so generous, and I just love your work, as I said at the beginning. I'm just passionate about supporting what you do. Here we've got some really fantastic leaders. Wayne Larkin there, created a new design for Optimism, and everyone here a leader. What are the questions you want us to answer to help you in your research and your leadership? How can we best help you?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Victor. I really appreciate the generosity of that offer. And I would love to ask people, one of the challenges is that it is a dance, pulling from the head and the heart, pulling from the cognitive, the emotional, and blending it, and not seeing it as an either or, but it's not a dichotomy, and I think when we get stressed, this is the challenge, is that when we get stressed, we go more ferocious or we go more warm. So some of us will go to more ferocity, this is the work we've got to do. We've got to do it right now. Task-oriented. I call them the fearsome leaders. And some people, when we're stressed, go too warm. So I call them enmeshed leaders. They're all about the drama. They're all about the relationships and making sure people like them. And they find it very hard to lift. So for me, that balance is super important, that we understand when we might be getting frayed or fragile and we're actually able to bring ourselves back to center. And it's the duality of pulling from those that's the challenge of the head and the heart. So my question to you all is, if this idea of ferocious warmth resonates with you around having to pull from both sides, when you're in the moment and things are quite complex and you have to make the decision that could make a real impact into the outcome of this conversation or this project or whatever it is, what are the things that are your go-to mantras or the things that keep you centered to be able to feel okay about making that choice, saying those words, when it's, the really important and pretty critical? What do you pull from?
Wayne, did you want to both throw an answer at a question? And I can see William waving as well, but Wayne, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. It's probably not an answer to the question. I have a question relationship to leadership. And that was a lot of times leadership, I guess, is from my perspective, is stereotyped. And there's 2 areas that I see that have dramatic change. One is what I call transference. We have leaders that actually, for a classic example, Vice Admiral Nelson, why he was so famous when he actually trained his captains to take command. And so he didn't have to command them in battles. You also see that with Captain David Marquette. He basically took on a nuclear submarine, which you may know of him, in the US, and took it to #1 for 5 years running. And also 4-star General Crystal in Afghanistan did the same sort of thing when they were losing Afghanistan. He had a transference to the men on the ground and actually became an enabler. And then the other one was passive leadership. And just two classic examples, I guess, is Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein, who actually aren't leading by commanding people, but they create great change and leadership by new ideas they come up with. So yeah, just I guess your comments on those two.
Yeah, I love transference. David Marquez, Turn the Ship Around, is a brilliant speaker. If you ever get to see him, he's just fantastic. But that idea of building initiative in the people that we lead, I think it is critical. And he's got a great ladder around that of who is it that you actually just need to be able to do the job. But I think it comes down to, again, a belief of, do you have a belief in the skills of your people, and do you see it as your role to build their skills? So the learning leader creates a learning environment, a learning culture where people are building their skills to be able to take more initiative and make decisions at their level. And too often we have leaders that get that out of kilter, don't they? I think, Wayne, and there's the delegation of authority is just not there, and so we end up with these people that have actually got really great skills that have never been able to, their light has never shone. So I think it is a really good, it comes under the expansion part of a leader, which is, do I build the skills of my people, but do I also allow them to step into their brilliance? It's always a good example of a great leader is, one that you find that their leaders leave, but they leave to lead other places because it hasn't been, I'm not going to build your leadership skills. I'm going to invest in you to take that. And the passive leadership, I think that's everywhere. And I think that the world is changing so much that we've got more opportunity than Einstein had to get out and do that influential leadership online. And there's entrepreneurs doing it everywhere. And kids are taking the lead on this and really doing social change through viral methods that are giving us, that have been in leadership for a long while, I think this real, wow, okay, so that's how you can do it. So I think they're both very important parts of the cogs of the whole machinery of it all, I think, too. Right?
My daughter sent me a TikTok the other day with one of the most famous TikTokers wearing an Optimism sweater and doing a TikTok. And so I thought that was real youth leadership. Now, John, you've unmuted. I think you had a response to Tracey's question.
Yes, thanks, Victor and Tracey. And partly commenting on Noirin's question about how do you manage when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. To me, one of the key things is when we can't see precisely what the objective is and therefore can't break down into little bits for everyone to take tasks and work on because we don't know quite where we're going. The important thing is to have the capabilities and the techniques for dealing with uncertainty. I think it's a bit like seeing a group of explorers in the old days setting out to reach the South Pole, not knowing exactly what it is they're going to face. How do they prepare for things that they don't really understand? And there's some good decision-making tools around that we can use, particularly if we use them with a group of people, because it helps the whole group buy into what's going to be the thing we choose to do here, so that it's not just the boss's decision, it's the group's decision. And
that's what Glue's all about. I'll send you a copy because I'm right with you.
Yeah.
John?
So
right with you.
it's how we make ourselves as leaders and the team that's coming with us. How do we make ourselves not dependent on a specific goal that we can see, but capable of working through uncertainty and ultimately finding a suitable goal, but being able to work happily and with optimism as we do it. In fact, that to me, that's the thing that will help us have optimism, the fact that we know how we can handle the situation, whatever it is, in terms of decision making, building strength, bringing other people into the team and so on. So I think there are ways to do it, and we can bring a team along and help them learn those ways and be joint sponsors of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, co-creation is the skill, isn't it, of the absolutely the 21st century. Co-creation and that ability to move with flexibility and adaptability, and you know, being, and that you have to be okay with making mistakes, don't you? You have to be okay with stuffing up. You have to be okay with going, that one didn't work. What are we going to do next? But it's a we, isn't it? And that's what I love about that work you're talking about, John. I think when you get, you know, I like working big with people, big visual charts and things like that, and people working all over them and drawing metaphors. And when people can see what they're putting up, wow, the buy-in, the commitment and co-creation just explodes. Yeah.
One of the questions I was, one of the questions
Tracey,
I was going to put to Tracey was a lot of the techniques we use for getting from A to B when we know what the goal is are already written. They're project management, they're process management and engineering, portfolio management. There's books and articles and everything on how you do the methodology. But they rely on us knowing what the defined outcome is to be. And,
yeah.
And so we need to be able to be flexible and
yes. You've named for me what the challenge is around ferocious work. When there's no warmth is, you know, I'm a critical friend with projects. You know, I might work with a team that's got a $22 million project, and I come in with them at the start and we talk deeply about how are we going to collaborate? What's our how? It's not the what, you know, as you say, we have process methodologies coming out every single orifice possible of our computers. And how often do they stuff up? And usually it's because the conversation is not had at the start that clearly articulates, what are we after? What's the sense of urgency here? Have we all got buy-in into the outcome? What would the outcomes look like? What's our big vision about this? What does the evidence say? What do our beliefs say about this? And how do we want to be if we come to this impasse where we're stuck? So too often we talk about the logic, the mind stuff. We don't talk about the heart. We don't talk about the emotional intelligence we need to be able to be leaders, learners in that space.
I just wanted to add something to what you were saying, John, when you said about, you know, people heading to the North Pole, South Pole, and the distinction between Scott, who made it, but no one made it back alive, and Shackleton, who never made it. But I loved his advertisement that he put in the newspaper, said, you know, needed, crew, probably won't make it back alive, need to have a hobby. And so when they got stuck in the ice for that 9 months, like we're kind of, they didn't try and get to the North Pole. They played rugby, they played all sorts of things that everybody else had brought along as their hobbies, and they built such extraordinary relationships so that when it was time that they could start to move on, they were invincible together. So I love that. So you've got the big vision, you know where you're heading, but hell, you don't try and do it if it's not going there. What have you got right now, right here, with which you can create joy and training and relationships, connection, all those things you're talking about, the being factors, Tracey. So I love that story of Shackleton and, you know, his way of leading through that and leading from his own authenticity as well.
Yeah,
so John, thanks for the reminder.
That's a great one. Thanks for reminding me of that one, Caroline, because it's a beautiful one. Yeah.
Shrikant.
Oh, thank you. So I would like to address the two questions, which is end of the tunnel question and also Tracey. It is always you need to get something back from the session as well. So I would like to focus on giving you the answer that you need. My answer to both of them is the strategy. So essentially it's about how well you can manage the risk and how well you are prepared. And it is the same question that same approach that I will take to see the end of the tunnel and how many different lights that we looked at. To be honest, in Shavik, we deployed 9 new applications in the downtime that we have compared to an average of 1 or 2 new applications in the previous years. So we totally turned around, and using a metaphor, I kind of fall more into the ferocious side, still somewhere in the middle, not on the scale, but on the ferocious side. So I went ahead with okay, let's try something new. So every team member has got a more aggressive learning path, whoever is not on the projects. And then whoever on the projects, we try to mix them up so everybody gets an opportunity on the projects. But answering your question very specifically, when you're in the moment, I usually don't let the moment come. So we had a one-on-one meeting with everybody, every staff member. I had a meeting with everybody every week. So half an hour, you tell me, okay, what are your problems? How is your family? How is your relatives? Who has got, how many people in your family has got corona? So I have statistics of everything. So just having that dialogue is very important. But at the same time, when I go into those meetings, I have probably prepared 50 questions along with my senior managers, that possible ones. So we always have questions for them in terms of them asking me the question, okay, is there a end of the tunnel, like light at the end of the tunnel? So what is the tunnel? No, we are changing tunnels. There is no another light tunnel in this one. So let's change the tunnels. So we actually changed the tunnels in terms of 3 or 4, and we worked out over a 2-month period which tunnel is going to work for us. And now we're just about to launch new products. Yes, as a business, this is where the risk management comes. Traditionally, we have only had a 3 month of surplus money sitting there. That wasn't enough, as like many businesses. But we had enough capacity to pull in the reserves to go for 6 months, and we used another 3 months to really turn the tables. So combination of risk management ability as a business leaders with a real execution capability to make sure the team is on board and giving them the visibility and execution. And that moment when you're on the spot should never arise if you're a really good manager.
Thanks, Shrikant, for that. Great.
That's my 2 cents, or
Thank
$2 million.
Thank you.
Tracey, one of the things that Isentia did just recently on leadership crisis, and you covered off on a couple of points that came out of their work, was empathy and connection. But getting back to your question, they also highlighted as a fallback the integrity of the person. Yeah. So where does that sit with you?
That sits in the being part, Robert. It's very much around the authenticity comes from my sense of integrity and my conviction. So it's a mixture of being and conviction, because conviction comes from having a really strong set of values and working from them, I think. So, you know, that I always talk to leaders around, you know, let's really investigate that you are committed to that purpose that you have. What is it that you're trying to achieve, and are you in alignment? So incongruence is the thing that kicks integrity out, isn't it? Is when our actions actually don't align to the conviction of our values. So for me, that's where integrity. So integrity is one of my 2 top values. Are integrity and compassion. That's what I hope to bring to the world. And, you know, sometimes our values are always aspirational, but that north of that is really useful for me to make those decisions. But I think there's a lot of leaders that haven't really thought necessarily about that. So, you know, I think when you can have leaders that will be able to, if they've made quite a tricky decision, they can actually go back to what's the value that is driving these conversations. That's where you get that authenticity and that transparency that people need around why particular decisions are made, even if you can't go into the detail of that people, you know, that's where trust comes from, isn't it? When people see the integrity of that alignment.
All of us. Tracey, you have inspired me since the first minute I met you. And you continue to inspire me with your passion and your verve and your curiosity and your willingness to share what you've learned. So on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for today.
You are welcome, and it's been a huge honour. Thank you, and a privilege to meet you all and to talk with you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that Centre for Optimism, Optimism Cafe with Tracey Ezard in conversation. We loved it, and we hope you'll join us for more events with the Centre for Optimism and follow Tracey Ezard and her wonderful work as well. Have a great day.